So my name is Linda Anderson, and I'm the Director of Curriculum and Instruction for Fremont Unified. And to my right is Mr. James Maxwell, who's the Director of Secondary Ed. And then these two awesome ladies who are going to run this night tonight and questions and stuff like that is first Carrie Ware, who's one of our science coaches, and then Sue Lemke, who's our program manager for math and science. So again, I'm happy you're all here, and I'm just going to turn it right over to them because they have a lot of great information to share. Okay.
Hi, good evening. My name is Carrie Ware, and I am the secondary science coach for Fremont Unified School District. A couple of things before we get started. Hopefully you received an index card so that you can write down any questions, and we'll be entertaining questions at the end. I'd also like to ask you to turn off your cell phone. This session is being recorded, and it will also be available on our district website. So today we're going to be talking about NGSS, and particularly how that impacts the high school standards. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, I was a high school science teacher at Mission San Jose High School for 18 years. I taught chemistry and biology and also AP Bio. That's my background. And I think I'm supposed to give somebody the high sign when it's time to advance the slide. So we're going to start off by watching a video. It's a short little video about the NGSS just to get us started.
The world is moving so fast.
I know.
I hope that these kids are prepared for what's ahead of them.
We're learning from science standards written in 1996? I wasn't even born in 1996.
It's crazy to me to think that, all across the country, our kids are being taught from science standards that are 20 years old.
So my son being a freshman here, how can you assure me that the level of education he's going to receive will prepare him to succeed in not only colleges, but in careers after he gets out of school?
In the coming years, jobs in science, technology, engineering, and math are expected to increase twice as much as jobs in other fields. We can't predict the future, but we can better prepare our children for it.
Basically, the way science is being taught now, it's a lot more applicable into the real world, and we're able to take the skills that we're learning and bring them further than just high school or middle school.
So I was asking Taylor about, things she was doing in school, and she was so excited because she said, we're learning how to be engineers, Mom.
Now we're doing the next generation science standards, or the NGSS, and basically what happens is it takes what we were learning like from books before. It wasn't doing as much like hands-on, and now they're becoming their own scientists, they're becoming engineers. They get so excited about saying, okay, today we're going to be an engineer, and they know the engineering process, they know what they're going to do first and how to solve the problems.
So there's the problem solving, the brainstorming, the cause and effect, and the justification. I know that those skills will last throughout my whole life in any career field.
If you push a seesaw, it'll go back and forth.
Next generation science standards will give our children the tools they need.
These new science standards, it's really preparing them to be those critical thinkers and more prepared in the job force. I mean, that's the goal. That's what we all want for our kids.
Find out more about the next generation science standards.
Did you have the internet when you were little?
So you saw in that video, it hit a lot of the high points of some of what I'm going to be talking about to begin with. The need for the new standards, what caused that, those different factors that came into play. So we're going to be looking at the rationale and the research behind the new standards. That's the why. We'll be discussing specifically in Fremont's implementation and timeline and what we've been doing at the district. Possible high school course sequences. We're in the process of refining that so that we can address the new standards and that all students can get all standards for the NGSS. And then at the end, we'll be addressing your questions and concerns. So what started all of this off is in 2013, the California State Board of Education adopted the NGSS. So that's when the NGSS became our standards and actually replaced the 98 standards that we were using previously. But we couldn't just flip a switch. So it's been this process of moving towards the new standards. But these are the standards for our state. So they are a part of the required science content for our classes, K through 12, and that they are all standards for all students. How that's really unique, especially when you think in terms of high school, there were standards for biology and there were standards for chemistry and for physics, but it was dependent upon the student actually taking that class. They had to take chemistry in order to get the chemistry standards, and there wasn't anything that was requiring them to take chemistry. They needed to take 2 years of science, a physical science and a life science, but there was nothing that required them to take and have access to particular standards. So that's where the NGSS is really, well, one of the areas in which it's really unique, is that these are standards then that are for all students, and they include life science standards, physical science standards, earth and space science standards, and also engineering. So it's really broad in the idea of standards and that they are for all students. And then also too, they outline the essential knowledge and skills that students need in order to be truly ready for college and careers in the 21st century. So these standards were developed in conjunction with college professors and other teachers to make sure that students would really be ready for college, better prepared for college, and then also for careers in the future. So prior to the adoption of the standards, there was real concern about the state of science for kids. What was happening in the classroom, the way the standards had been written previously, they were written really with an emphasis on memorization. And it was seen that those standards were not, it's good to have standards, but those might not have been actually the best standards to have in terms of science education. We didn't have enough students who were interested in STEM professions in this country. Kids were not ready for college level coursework in science, and you can see the different statistics there. 4% of the US bachelor's degrees were awarded in engineering compared with 31% in China. So it's an issue in this country that science education needed to be addressed, and it needed to start with K through 12 education. Also not just in the realm of education, but what was also happening in terms of patents that were being developed in our country. The feeling was we were kind of falling behind, and so we needed to address this issue, this ever-growing issue. And then the opportunities for STEM fields have been growing exponentially. Do we have enough people in this country who would be qualified for these jobs? So all of these things came together, making professionals want to look at the science standards for K through 12 education and saying that those standards needed to be revamped. So when we look at programs, we want to make sure that students are really engaged in STEM, in hands-on learning. That in elementary school, that there's more time spent on science education. And also addressing this long-standing debate over what students should know and be able to do by the time they finish high school in science. So the 98 standards, as I mentioned before, were more of a list of memorization. Students will know, students will know, students will know, and it could all just really be memorized. And that was seen as being totally just not worth it in terms of real legitimate science education. And you can see that for the next generation science standards, just let me read down that list for you. To have a deep understanding of concepts, but also to engage in scientific thinking. The big ideas and cross-cutting concepts, science and engineering practices, the integration of Common Core, STEM practices, and then also learning as a developmental progression. That these are standards that begin in elementary school and they build in complexity until you reach high school. So when the students learn about something like molecules, that they learn about molecules in elementary school, and that the idea of molecules becomes more complex as they get into high school. So the NGSS is set up to be something called three-dimensional instruction. Now, in terms of the 98 standards, if we were to look at that rope, the strand in the rope that says core ideas, that's kind of like where the standards were before for science. And now our new standards are much richer than they were before, that they also include what are called the practices. Those are the science and engineering practices. These are the things that we expect all students to be able to do in science, to do investigations, to argue from evidence, to ask great scientific questions, to explain their thoughts, to develop models. Those are just a few of the science and engineering practices that students are asked to be able to do. And then the cross-cutting concepts. That's a way in which we want to help students organize this information in their mind in terms of understanding the scientific concept in relationship to a cross-cutting concept like patterns. So when we look at a chemical reaction, what are the patterns that we see? In the biology class, when we study different types of organisms, what are some of the patterns that we see? In physics, when we look at Newton's laws, are there certain patterns that we begin to see? So they're called cross-cutting concepts because we can look across the different science domains and we can look for patterns. There's also structure and function, and there's matter and energy. There are 7 cross-cutting concepts. So what we have here then, in terms of practices, cross-cutting concepts, and core ideas, what we have are practices. What do scientists do? Cross-cutting concepts. How do they organize this information in their head, the big ideas? And then the core ideas. What do scientists really know? The facts that our 98 standards used to address. So now the standards are much broader and they're much more reflective of really being a scientist. So some other shifts from the 98 standards. Notice right there, it says based on phenomena. So that's a huge, huge shift for science education because there were too many students who felt like there was no connection between the science they were learning in their class and then what's happening in the real world. So now we want to explicitly make those connections and use real world phenomena and bring it into the classroom so that students get to make those connections between what they're reading in their book, the lab that they're doing, and then what's going on in the real world. So phenomena is really key in science instruction now. Focused on critical thinking skills and learning concepts through science and engineering practices. That standards in the past were focused only on what they would know and memorizing a body of language, or a body of knowledge, but now it's really about being a scientist. So there are lots of shifts that need to happen in the classroom and different ways in which teachers need to change the way that they teach science. Because they were teaching science to standards that were written a long time ago that required science to be taught in a different way in order to meet those standards. With the NGSS standards, teachers are going to have to change their teaching practice. So there's actually a longer list of shifts that teachers have to make, but here's 2 of them right here. That science should not be just rote memorization of facts and terminology. Facts and terminology are still very important, but they are not the be-all and the end-all of science. That facts and terminology are learned as needed while developing explanations and designing solutions supported by evidence-based arguments and reasoning. So this is the students actually having to demonstrate this knowledge. That learning of ideas disconnected from questions about phenomena. And instead we have systems thinking and modeling to explain phenomena and to give a context of the ideas learned. So to give you a really an actual example of these 2 standards, and you can see how they are different, The standard at the top comes from the 98 standards on chemical equilibrium. So the old standard was chemical equilibrium is a dynamic process at the molecular level. As a basis for understanding this concept, students know how to use Le Chatelier's principle to predict the effect of changes in concentration, temperature, and pressure. And students know equilibrium is established when forward and reverse rates of reaction are equal. That was the standard, and that's how it was written. And notice how it says students know, it's in italics. That's exactly how they were written. The emphasis was on knowing or memorizing those facts. Now, if we look down below it, this is the NGSS standard that deals with the same material. It says, refine the design of a chemical system by specifying a change in conditions that would produce increased amounts of product at equilibrium. So we've gone from students memorizing something or demonstrating that they've memorized to actually students being able to refine the design of a chemical system. So that's a lot more engagement on the part of the student. The part that's written in red, that's a clarification statement that's also part of the standard. It gives more of a parameter, kind of like where's the beginning and the end of this standard. Because just reading what's written in black, that's really pretty broad. So teachers need some direction, and that's where the clarification statement comes in that's in red. So I think you can see those standards, even though they're both about Le Chatelier's principle, are very different kinds of standards in terms of the way that a teacher would organize their class, because in the one on the bottom, that's what you want students to be able to do, versus the one on the top, which you would have students memorize. Here's an example from junior high school. So in a past 7th grade life science class, students know plants and animals have levels of organization for structure, function, including cells, tissues, organs, organ systems, and the whole organism. We can compare that to the NGSS. Use arguments supported by evidence for how the body is a system of interacting subsystems composed of groups of cells. So you can see that there's a huge emphasis now on what science really is. Science is really about studying systems. Whether those systems have to do with physical science, or if they have to do with life science or earth science, it's really about studying systems. And we want students to be able to do something, not just to memorize. So I'd like to read this quote to you because it's a very powerful quote that came from the National Research Council. It says, the progression from novice to expert in science involves more than just acquisition of rote content knowledge. Experts are able to identify patterns, solve problems, and make connections in ways that reflect deep understanding of the content. Research indicates that deep learning of science content, particularly content that is related to complex, multidisciplinary systems, is best achieved when students have multiple opportunities to engage in a few key fundamental concepts over a sustained period of time in many different and authentic contexts. That quote is so rich in so many of the content, or so many of the concepts of NGSS. So our disciplinary core ideas aren't just like they were before. These are not just facts that are to be memorized, and what's also different about them too is that they fit into these domains of science, of life science, physical science, earth and space science, and also engineering and technology. That is definitely a new piece that has been added to our plate because students need to learn about engineering. They need to be experienced with the design cycle. They need to be engaged in that process. Physical science, that's a combination of what we would call chemistry and physics. They're all put together into physical science. And then you can see there's life science. Earth and space science, that's going to be new for us too, because although that might not be a new class at every school, it's not necessarily material that's been heavily emphasized in the past. Students will typically take a life science class like biology, then they'll take chemistry, and they'll take physics, and they may or may not ever get to earth science standards. Well, now they are a part of the NGSS with an expectation that students will learn about earth and space science also.
So the disciplinary core ideas then, they have a broad importance across multiple science and engineering disciplines, and they are a key organizing concept. The other idea too is that they will be addressed over multiple grades. In fact, could we go back to that previous slide for just a moment? So for instance, see the numbering, it says LS1, LS2, LS3. That's not based upon importance. They're just categorized. But there is an LS1 from molecules to organisms, structures and processes that begins in elementary school. And that concept builds into junior high school and then into high school. And so you can actually follow a progression of how this concept becomes more sophisticated as we go from K through 12. And that's true for all of the other disciplinary core ideas also. Thank you. You can go ahead and advance it. And to the next slide too, please. So let me give you an example, because the NGSS is not written as content. These are standards, and then the teacher finds the content in order to illustrate that standard. So here our disciplinary core idea has to do with the interaction between molecules. What a great way to look at that is just by looking at water. So for instance, the fact that water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. Why does water? When we look at that formula for water, H2O, and we add up our hydrogens and our oxygen, we have a fairly light molecule, yet it boils at a pretty high temperature. When we compare it to carbon dioxide, which if we add up the carbon and the two oxygens together, we see that that's a much heavier molecule, yet it has such a low boiling point by comparison. There must be something going on between those water molecules that is affecting the boiling point. Next slide. So if we graph out what happens to water as we progressively heat it up, we see that it reaches certain plateaus. These plateaus then, this concept would be related to the force of attraction between water molecules. Well, this would be the hydrogen bonding. So there is a single quantity called energy due to this remarkable fact that the system's total energy is conserved. And energy is best understood at the microscopic scale at which it can be modeled as either motions of particles or stored force fields. And that's one of the things that we would want students to be able to do, is to model what seems to be going on between these water molecules that would cause water to behave the way it does compared to other light molecules. So what's the point? As I mentioned before, this has to do with the electrical interactions between molecules. So this is part of the disciplinary core idea, physical science 2.B. We can also relate this phenomena of what happens to boiling water to other types of electrical interactions. For instance, our gecko that's attaching to the wall, the fact that we can't actually push our finger through something, that we can feel solid surfaces. You can see what's happening with the magnet, Post-its. There's all kinds of real world phenomena that we can bring this in so that students understand that this all has to do with a core idea of electrical attractions between molecules. So our teachers have been on a transition plan, and this is an example of something that they would have looked at, of what's been happening for our 2016-2017 school year and how we're progressing into the future as we're transitioning our curriculum. What we're trying to do is bring our curriculum into alignment with the California Framework for Science, and we're doing it in such a way that we're being thoughtful and methodical so that teachers are able to make that transition. So all the different grade levels, they all have transition plans so that they're moving towards the target of being at complete implementation. Thank you very much for your attention.
So when you registered, there was a part for you to indicate what your questions and concerns were. And so from those questions and concerns, we built the presentation. A lot of what you were asking about, what's the difference between NGSS and the old standards, Carrie did a great job of explaining. There were other questions that are really now going to be addressed. You had a lot of questions that are going to come in the second part. So one of the questions was, how do we compare with other districts? Well, when the state adopted the standards in 2013, they set a target year of 2018 for everyone in California to be at full implementation. When you look at all the districts around us, this is just a snapshot. Every district is transitioning to the next generation science standards. Some are further ahead, some are further behind. We're right in the middle of the pack. This is just a snapshot to show you. Some districts are starting to put in their high school course sequences. Some have changed their elementary entirely. Some they're not quite as far along as we are. One district up there, San Ramon, they just won the blue ribbon for their entire district. They won a distinguished award, gold ribbon. I can't remember what it was, but it was an award for the whole district because of the work that they're doing for NGSS. Some districts like Oakland, they're almost really at full implementation. Again, Fremont's sort of in the middle. Next slide. So our transition plan, it started actually before 2013 because we had a group of teachers that were participating in a grant where they were learning about the instructional shifts. So in 2013 to 2016, the state said, this is a period of awareness and transition where you train your teachers, give them professional development to learn how to deliver instruction in a different way. That would be shifting what we call lesson pedagogy, conducting engineering activities, bringing that into the classroom, and then doing more scientific thinking and discussions. So you might have heard your students talk about that they are being asked to do discourse in the classroom. They're asked to talk about their ideas more because we know from research that that's one of the ways people learn is when they actually can talk about their ideas. So those have been some of the emphasis that we've done over the last 3 or 4 years. This year, this school year that we're finishing up in the next few months, we had our new next generation science standard course 1 at the high school, NGSS 1, and then we had teacher created units, the transition plan that Carrie has just shown you. We also did some bridge curriculum for K through 5. We bought a program called Mystery Science. So if you have kids in elementary school, they're starting to get those lessons in their classroom. Super engaging, kids are really interested in it, and it allows the classroom teacher as well as the science specialist to teach science. At the junior high, we bought another program, a supplemental program called iQuest, IQWST, which stands for Investigating Questions with Science and Technology. Those are just units at the iQuest for 6, 7, and 8 that teachers are able to start trying out using that curriculum to teach. In 2018, 2019, we'll be at full implementation. And again, the important points are that we're not at the front, we're not at the back, we're in the middle. But we have a responsibility to teach the standards that have been adopted by the state. And we share in a desire to have kids like science and be engaged in science and see themselves as possibly going on to study science. Because even though we have seen 100%, 200% increase in students who take AP Calculus, AP Bio, AP Chem, the number of students who go into those majors in college or go into that field is flat. So we see this huge increase of kids who all take these courses, and then they say, that's it, I'm done, I got into college and I don't want to study it anymore. And we need them to want to study it. So our goal is to have kids be engaged in science. Next slide. So in more detail, 2016, 2017 was the first year of our NGSS 1 course. And I see lots of cameras going up, and you can do that, but this is going to be online. You'll get all these slides online, so you don't have to do that. We are also having our biology, our chemistry, our grades 6, 7, and 8 start to integrate units that are NGSS aligned, that focus the learning around a concept, the DCI, the Disciplinary Core Idea, and some practices. So students are engaged in learning the science by doing the scientific practices. In 2017-18, next year, we will again offer that NGSS 1 course, and then the biology and chemistry courses will continue to integrate new units, and they're aligning that with those earth science standards that you'll see in a future slide. And then the following year will be completely at alignment. Our high school courses will all be NGSS aligned courses. The California Science Test. That test, the old CST test is gone. We will have the pilot test this spring. If you have a 5th grader, an 8th grader, or 10th it's 10th grade for our high school, that's when that test is going to be given in Fremont Unified. All 5th graders will take the pilot test. All 8th graders will take it. And this year in Fremont Unified, all 10th graders will take that pilot test. We're not going to get the results of that. It really is a test of the test. They're trying out different kinds of test items and trying to see how does the system function. If we give students, they're going to have 10 to 25 questions and then a performance task. And that test is going to take about an hour. Next year, it'll be a field test, and we're being told that you will get results for how your student did. We will definitely have an idea at each school site how students did. And then in 2018-19, again, 5th grade, 8th grade, and then the difference will be in high school is that when a student is done with their science classes, if they take their last class in the 11th grade, then they would take that California science test, or if they finished in 12th, then they would take that test. Those reports will come home with students when they get their SBAC testing. They'll get the test results from the California science test. And we're being told that that test score will be used possibly the same way that the SBAC scores are used, that they're going to be used to indicate students' proficiency level. That's not a for sure thing, but we're being told that that is the goal, is that that test will indicate how students are doing, probably not that 2018-19 year. Next slide. So one of the courses that we will be transitioning to is called Physics in the Universe. And if you look at the concepts up there, you see forces in motion, types of interactions, energy definitions. Those concepts are the same as a traditional physics course. So there's not a big difference in those concepts. What's different, and you can't really see it, is in red, there are some earth science topics that are going to also be taught. And so when students are learning the physics, oftentimes they're learning it through the lens of earth science. For example, you see wave properties. That's a physics topic that they'll be studying, but they will be learning it in the context of plate tectonics. So they're going to be learning about waves through seismic waves, through earthquakes. That's really relevant, it's interesting to kids, and it gives them a context for this knowledge of waves to actually have meaning for them. So that is how the courses are going to be slightly different. The content in some of it is going to be the same as they had in a physics class or the same in a biology, but again, we're teaching it oftentimes through the lens of a relevant phenomena, something that actually has meaning to them. So that's physics. The next course is Living Earth, and again, same topics: ecosystems, structure and function, genetics. Those things that make up a biology course, they're going to be taught using some relevant earth science concepts for it, or sometimes relating it. So how does photosynthesis and respiration, how are they related to the Earth's atmosphere? And how does that relate to the Earth's climate? So all those things come together in a more meaningful way. And the next course, Chemistry of Earth Systems, again, you see all the topics that have been taught in chemistry, and then some earth science that is woven in there. So how will those courses be arranged? One of the options that we're looking at, and this decision has not been made, we're in discussions right now, your high school science teachers, the department chairs, the curriculum council, everybody is thinking about this deeply. So one way that we might structure this is that we might offer Physics in the Universe first. In this case, the course would be more of a conceptual physics course. There'll be math in it, but the greater math emphasis would be in the honors level course. Overall, it still is going to be a conceptual physics course. Then students would move into Living Earth in their sophomore year, and which again is sort of like the biology with the earth science, and then they would finish up in their junior year with Chemistry of Earth Systems. Now, a couple things to note. You see the arrows go back and forth, and that's because the courses are not going to be, you're not locked into honors or non-honors depending on where you start in your freshman year. We've designed it so that students can move back and forth between an honors and a non-honors course sequence. It is also not tied to an accelerated math pathway. So students could go into honors, one of the honors courses, even if they weren't in an accelerated math class, and I'm going to show you that in a future slide. What you notice is that in the junior year, students then can take, at most sites, they can double up then and take an AP class, AP Physics or AP Environmental Studies or AP Bio, and in their senior year they can continue to take the AP classes or other science electives that they want to. In tiny print is about the GATE and honors qualification. I put that on a later slide because you can barely see it. So that's option one. Option two, we start with Living Earth as a freshman course, and then go into Chemistry of Earth Systems, and then their junior year, they have Physics in the Universe. One of the differences in this course sequence, if you can go to the next slide, is that the AP Physics class has a lot of the same topics that are in the Physics in the Universe class, and that could be a substitution course. So students could go from Living Earth to Chemistry of Earth Systems and then to AP Physics, because the AP Physics course only requires Algebra 1 to be completed, successfully completed before taking that course. It does not require chemistry or biology as a prerequisite, while AP Bio requires that you've had a biology class, and AP Chemistry requires that you've had a chemistry class. Those cannot be, your AP Chem and AP Bio cannot be your first year course for those. So then in that way, students then could take AP Physics, and they could then double up if they wanted to, and in their senior year, they could take other science electives. Next slide. If you have a student who's in NGSS 1, if you have a freshman, in that course that they will take next year as freshmen, that has a lot of our Physics in the Universe standards, and so they would start in that as a freshman, and in their sophomore year they would go to Living Earth, and their junior year they would take the Chemistry of Earth Systems. That is their pathway regardless of which sequence we go to, because their NGSS 1 course is a physical science credit, and it has a lot of, again, the Physics in the Universe standards. So then the next course that's logical for them to make sure that they get all of their content would be the Living Earth course. And then in their junior year, Chemistry of Earth Systems. If you want to take a look at how the math lines up with that. So a student has not done any acceleration, they start out in Algebra 1 as 9th graders, then if we went with this sequence, they could take either Living Earth or Honors Living Earth. And then in 10th grade, they would take geometry. And at that point, they cannot take Honors Chemistry of Earth System because they don't have the math that lines up with that. In their junior year, when they take Algebra 2 or Algebra 2 Trig, they possibly could take the Honors Physics in the Universe course. But that depends on other factors. For sure, when students start, if they've never been in the accelerated math, they can have access to that Honors Living Earth. If a student was in the accelerated pathway in junior high school, then they have access to all the honors science classes as long as they meet the requirements. And that's true for any of the students. They have to meet the requirements for honors, which I'll talk about in a later slide. And then a student who does a double, the second accelerated in high school in math, they're in their freshman year, they're in the Geometry Algebra 2 Trig accelerated math class. Again, they have access to all the honors classes. Next slide. So one of the things that's important to note is that this reform of science, it actually started in the AP science classes. The AP science classes underwent a reform and a revision a few years before NGSS was adopted. So the NGSS courses are actually more aligned and will prepare students for more success in the AP classes than our old standards did. And this is one slide to show you that. So when you look at the AP science classes, they explain the content in what they call essential knowledge statements. And so for example, at the first slide, Living Earth, in AP biology, there are 55 essential knowledge statements. The Living Earth addresses 44 of those. So this is a wonderful foundation for students. They take Living Earth, they have exposure to 44 out of the 55 essential knowledge statements. They are set up to do really well when they get to AP Bio. When you look at Chemistry of Earth Systems, there are 40 of the 63 AP Chem essential knowledge statements. And in Physics of the Universe, it's 47. The 88 is not actually reflective of reality, because that is 3 AP Physics classes, AP Physics 1, 2, and AP Physics C. So if you take out the AP Physics C, that's about 18 to 20 essential knowledge statements. It's a much closer alignment. So students, when they take the NGSS courses, they're really set up for success in their AP Science classes later on. When we look at the practices that Carrie talked about, the science and engineering practices, and we connect them to the practices that are required for students to show mastery of in the AP courses, every one of them aligns to one of the AP science practices. And the last one, practice 7, it is aligned to the cross-cutting concepts, that one dimension that we were talking about. So all of those practices connect. Again, it's just another evidence that students get a really strong foundation for their AP courses in the NGSS courses. Next slide. When we take a look at the content that's taught in the NGSS courses, Physics of the Universe, Living Earth, and Chemistry of Earth Systems, the topics that are addressed in those courses are also aligned to the SAT subject matter tests. So a student, after they finish the Physics of the Universe, they are prepared to take the Physics SAT test. And when they finish Living Earth, they're prepared to take the biology SAT tests, and same thing for chemistry. The math sometimes is an issue, so if they don't have the math, then they might have to hold off on taking those SAT subject classes. But when we looked at that pathway that I showed you, the sequence of courses will allow them with their math, they'll be prepared to take those subject matter science tests. And the next slide. So how are we developing teacher expertise? We have been doing professional development, and we've been having release days where the teachers could come to the district office and get trained. We've sent them to trainings. We've come to their sites and done training. Just today, one of our teachers went to the National Science Teachers Conference down in, I think it was LA. This weekend he was there, and he came back and he said, we were asking him, what did you learn? And he said, I learned that Carrie Ware, our secondary science coach, is providing the best professional development. So he was there at the national level, and he felt that the professional development he's been getting from our coach has been superior to what was there. So that's a fantastic call out for her, but also to let you know that we are that we've done a lot of training. We are also moving to a different training model now. We're moving to what we call embedded professional development, where at each site we will have these teachers who are moving along, they're moving farther along in terms of their knowledge of the NGSS, that they will have open lab classrooms so that a teacher who's teaching on site can go and see what it looks like in practice. That's one of the things that we're doing to help build teachers' capacity. We're going to continue our ongoing professional development and have Carrie continue to lead professional development. We are utilizing what we call the PLCs. We have professional learning communities where they come together, they look at the standards, they kind of unwrap them and say, what does the standard mean? What is proficiency going to look like? And they design some lessons around that. And then we've done some partnering with the County Office of Education, and we'll continue to partner with Cal State East Bay, also has some professionals that have been working with us. So these are the things that we're doing to develop our teachers' capacity to teach NGSS. There are no textbooks yet, and this is a cause for concern with people. The state is just now compiling a list of textbooks that will be available for adoption. But they won't have that probably till 2018, the same year we're supposed to be at full implementation. Luckily, what you saw in the content concepts themselves are not changing significantly. It's the instructional shifts that are really changing. And so we've been doing a variety of things, all the professional development. In the K through 6 elementary, we again adopted Mystery Science. In the junior high, we adopted another program. These are bridge curriculum. They don't cover everything, but they cover parts of it to help teachers see what does instruction look like. And then we've been creating some teacher and coach created units of study. The California State Framework has a whole bunch of resources where they show what instruction could look like for these courses. Even these physics in the universe, all three of those courses, chemistry of earth systems, the state framework has these vignettes that really show this is how instruction in a unit could look. These are some things that you would emphasize. And so we're leveraging all of that to give teachers resources to teach. And then again, this summer we'll do more professional development. We will have some days where we bring teachers together, pay them to go through several units. And we'll be writing instructional guides for the K through 6, possibly K through 8, that will help teachers see what would be a sequence of instruction. For honors science, this was on the slide. Students who are not GATE identified, they would be students who have an A at all 4 semesters in junior high school. They can go ahead and take those honors courses, that freshman level course. For students who are GATE identified and already in an honors class, they just need to maintain a C to be able to take the honors classes in high school. And one of the questions that came up a few times was, we are not trying to get rid of the honors science in high school or in junior high. Those programs are still in place. And students do not have to be GATE identified to take an AP science course. They just have to meet the prerequisites that I talked about earlier. So one more slide here. People ask for resources. These resources will be on the district webpage. And then finally, on the last slide, we have this link to a Google document where you can go on and actually post your questions or your concerns or your feedback if something comes up that you would like to get answered. But you can email Carrie Ware or Mr. Maxwell, myself, or Linda Anderson, and we will get back to you right away. We also have on our district webpage, if you look on there, there's an NGSS FAQ, frequently asked questions, that shows you what we're considering for the progression of courses. It answers a whole bunch of questions that I saw on when you registered, but you can also ask other questions and then we'll put them onto that FAQ page.